bringing you with the more creepiest real paranormal stories. The door. So not much time passed after the birth of my son, and my then husband and I bought an old century house with 3 rooms to accommodate the growing family, our son, ourselves, and a medium-large dog. I was always afraid of the dark since I was a child, because once a neighbor boy peeked through my window and I had this eerie feeling about it. I used to reassure myself that all those creaks, thumps, and rustling noises coming from the old trees scratching against the windows were just typical sounds of an old house. The radiant heat system was very loud and the backyard gate never latched correctly, clanking persistently in the wind. I often turned to my defensive strategy, hiding under the covers instead of dealing with the disturbances. My husband took the dog when we eventually separated, but I kept the creaky old house. One evening, my little son and I were watching a movie in the front room as dusk began to set. My phone battery died, and I'm someone who rarely keeps an eye on chargers. Thus, I began my search for a charger in the house. Finally, I found one in the kitchen. So when I started to walk towards plugging it in the socket, waves of dread silenced me. My skin felt cold, and my instincts screamed something was wrong. Turning towards the backyard, I finally realized with a jolt that the gate was wide open again. But far more troubling, a person sat cross-legged in the yard, facing the house. Though the daylight was fading, the figure wore a hood and dark sunglasses and seemed to be made of stone. As I approached the window to get a better view of what I was seeing, the complete absence of movement said chillingly enough that they knew I had noticed them. Heart thumping, I quickly locked the back door, took my charger and phone, and ran back to the dining room, where I messaged the first online friend that came up. I told them someone was in my yard, my phone was dead, and if they hadn't heard from me shortly, they should contact the police. Expecting the intruder to leave, now that they had been seen, I waited anxiously for my phone to power back on while trying to distract my son. When I was finally able to call 911, I told the dispatcher that the person was likely gone, but requested an officer check the yard. She instructed me to discreetly verify their presence and ensure the door was secure. Creeping toward the kitchen, I realized that while the back door was locked, the oversized dog door was completely unprotected. Just as panic set in, I rose slightly to glance outside and found myself face to face with the figure peering through the window. I froze, my words dissolving into incoherent terror as the dispatcher urged me to grab my son and lock ourselves in a room. As I pulled him up into my arms, the unmistakable creaking of the dog door swinging open echoed through the stillness. Abandoning all else, I sprinted out the front door with my son and tore across the street to my neighbor's house, pounding on the door like it owed me money. Once they let us in, they quietly diverted my attention with my son as I trembled and cried, consumed by concern for the cat we left behind. Within an hour, police arrived at my house, and soon an officer emerged from the backyard with the hooded figure in custody. She had been sitting on my back step, absent-mindedly swinging her arm in and out of the dog door. That night, I boarded it shut. But even after locking it, I could never get rid of the feeling that everything that had sounded, the knocks, the open gates, the unexplained bumps, hadn't been the old house after all. It wasn't long before we moved away, never looking back.